Let's start. The threats are: queen takes pawn, queen takes knight check, knight takes rook, rook takes rook. Here are checks in puzzle position. Queen takes knight check. The puzzle is solved using: knight takes rook, knight takes knight check, king to g3, knight to d7, rook takes knight. Next, here are the threats: knight takes pawn, queen takes knight, queen takes pawn check. Checks in puzzle position are: queen to d5 check, queen to f5 check, queen to f6 check, queen takes pawn check, queen to g4 check, queen to h3 check. The best move in puzzle position is: queen to f5 check, king to e7, queen takes pawn check, king to d8, queen to f6 check, king to c8, queen takes rook check. Next, threats in this position are: queen takes pawn, queen takes pawn, queen takes pawn. There are no checks in this position. The puzzle is solved using: queen to d4, queen to e7, queen to h8 check, king to f7, queen takes pawn check, king to e6, queen takes pawn check. Next, let us look at threats in puzzle position. There are no threats in this position. There are no checks in this position. The puzzle is solved using: e4, d4, king to e2, king to g7, king to d3. Next, threats in this position are: pawn takes pawn, queen takes pawn check, queen takes queen. Checks in this position are: queen to g5 check, queen takes pawn check, queen to g3 check, queen to f2 check, queen to g4 check. The puzzle is solved using: queen to g5 check, queen to g4, queen takes rook check, rook to f2, queen to f4. Next puzzle, threats in puzzle position are: there are no threats in this position. There are no checks in this position. Here is the solution to the puzzle: king to g1, queen to f8, queen to f6 check, king to g8, rook to d8, rook to g4 check, king to h1, rook to e4, rook takes queen check. Next, let us look at threats in puzzle position: queen takes bishop, bishop takes pawn, bishop takes pawn. There are no checks in this position. The best move in puzzle position is: queen to c8, bishop to b6, queen takes queen. Let's continue. Threats in this position are: rook takes knight, bishop takes knight, knight takes knight. There are no checks in this position. Answer to this puzzle is: rook takes knight, bishop takes bishop, rook takes bishop. Let's continue. Threats in this position are: queen takes rook. There are no checks in this position. The puzzle is solved using: queen takes rook, queen to c5, c7. One more. Let us look at threats in puzzle position. Knight takes pawn check, pawn takes pawn. The checks are: knight to d7 check, knight takes pawn check, bishop to b4 check. Here is the solution to the puzzle: bishop to b4 check, king to g8, bishop to d3. Next, puzzle position vulnerabilities are: king takes pawn, pawn takes pawn. There are no checks in this position. The best move in puzzle position is: king takes pawn, knight to f6 check, king to f3. Next, let us look at threats in puzzle position. There are no threats in this position. There are no checks in this position. The puzzle is solved using: king to d5, king to b6, c4, pawn takes pawn check, king takes pawn. Another puzzle. Let us look at threats in puzzle position. Queen takes bishop, queen takes pawn check. Let us look at checks in puzzle position. Queen takes pawn check, rook to e8 check. The puzzle is solved using: rook to e4, queen to f6 check, bishop to b2. Let's continue. Threats in this position are: queen takes rook check, queen takes pawn check, queen takes pawn check, bishop takes pawn. Checks in this position are: queen to g7 check, queen takes rook check, Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Here is the solution to the puzzle. Bishop to e3. Bishop to d2. Bishop takes bishop. Queen takes pawn. Rook to c1. Another one. Let us look at threats in puzzle position. Bishop takes knight. Rook takes knight. Here are the checks. Bishop to f7, check. Bishop to h7, check. Here is the solution to the puzzle. Bishop takes knight. Rook takes bishop. Rook takes rook. Pawn takes rook. Bishop to f5, check. Next puzzle, the threats are: bishop takes bishop, check. Pawn takes knight. Knight takes pawn. Knight takes knight. Here are checks in puzzle position. Bishop takes bishop, check. Answer to this puzzle is: knight takes knight. Bishop takes bishop. Queen to f4. f6. Knight takes bishop. Another puzzle. The threats are: knight takes knight. There are no checks in this position. The best move in puzzle position is: knight takes knight. Knight takes knight. King to e5. King to f7. d6. Let us go to the next puzzle. Threats in puzzle position are: pawn takes pawn. Queen takes pawn. Queen takes pawn. Queen takes pawn. The checks are: rook to f1, check. Queen to e4, check. Queen to f1, check. The puzzle is solved using: rook to f1, check. Rook takes rook. Queen takes rook, check. King to h2. Knight to f3, check. King to g3. Queen to g1, check. King takes knight. Queen to h1, check. King to e2. Queen takes queen. Let us go to the next puzzle. Threats in this position are: rook takes pawn. Bishop takes pawn, check. The checks are: bishop takes pawn, check. Answer to this puzzle is: bishop takes pawn, check. King takes bishop. Queen takes knight. Knight to f3. Queen to g4, check. King to f1. Rook takes knight. Let's continue. Threats in this position are: there are no threats in this position. There are no checks in this position. Here is the solution to the puzzle. h5. Knight to e5, check. King to f5. Let us go to the next puzzle. Puzzle position vulnerabilities are: queen takes pawn. Knight takes pawn. Bishop takes knight. Here are the checks. Queen to f5, check. Solution to the puzzle is: bishop takes knight. Bishop takes bishop. Queen to f5, check. Let's continue. Here are the threats. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes pawn, check. The checks are: queen to g6, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen to f5, check. The answer is: rook to d6. Rook to g8. Rook takes queen. Rook takes pawn, check. King to h1. Rook to g5, check. Rook takes bishop. Rook takes queen. Rook to c4. Let's see the next puzzle. The threats are: there are no threats in this position. There are no checks in this position. Answer to this puzzle is: rook to c4. Rook to f1, check. Rook to f4. Another puzzle. Let us look at threats in puzzle position. Bishop takes pawn. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes bishop. Pawn takes pawn. The checks are: queen takes pawn, check. Answer to this puzzle is: queen takes pawn, check. King to f1. Pawn takes pawn. Let's see the next puzzle. Threats in puzzle position are: rook takes pawn. Let us look at checks in puzzle position. Rook to f1, check. Rook to c2, check. The puzzle is solved using: bishop to h6. Rook takes pawn. Bishop takes knight, check. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe.